Okay, dear students, today we are going to discuss about functions as collector of bank funds, right? So, previous class we finished at sources and uses of bank funds, where we collect the source from to generate the bank funds, and where we will use these funds. Okay? Okay, today we are going to discuss about these things. Bank collect funds from three main sources. Bank collects funds from three main sources. What are them? Deposits, borrowed funds, capital. Do you know about those things? Those terms? Do you have any idea about this? Guys, are you sleeping? Okay. So bank mainly collects its funds from deposits, right? They already have the capital when they start up the business, right? And they also collect the funds from borrowed funds, from borrowing funds from some other institutions, sister concerned institutions. It could be from Bangladesh Bank, Central Bank. Okay? So the variations in these sources of funds depend on the following three factors. So what are the factors? What are the factors? The variation in the sources of funds depend on the following three factors. You have to consider these three factors before collecting the funds from different sources. Okay? So what are them? Duration to hold the fund at the bank disposal. How long you are using those funds? Okay? How long you will use these funds? You are collecting the funds from different sources, so it should have the duration to, duration to use these funds, right? You are getting the point? And then you have to consider relative advantages. For example, you are collecting funds from two different sources. So you need to collect the fund from one source, but you have two options to get the fund, right? Which one you will select? Of course, you would consider the relative advantages from these two sources, right? Of these two sources, okay? And then cost of funds. You have to consider the cost of funds. If you collect the funds from a different source, if its cost is very high, will you collect the fund from that source? Will you go for this? Will you go for this? Why? Why? You are always intended to minimize your cost of borrowing funds, right? Okay, what are the costs usually generated from the sources of funds? Do you have any idea about this? There are two sources of funds, right? When you are going to finance to your company, then you have two options. You have a capital structure, right? One is debt financing, one is equity financing. We know about this. We have discussed those things before, right? So when you are getting the fund from debt financing, then what is the cost of that fund? What is the cost? If you collect the fund from bank loan, for example, then what would be the expense? What would be the cost of this source? Interest payment. If you are getting the fund from that bank, that institution, in terms of debt financing, then you need to pay interest. You need to pay interest. So this is your cost, this is your expense of funds. You understand? If you go for equity financing, for example, you are going to sell your shares, okay, to publics in general, okay. If you are a listed company, okay, then what will be happen? What will be the cost for that funds as well? What will be the cost of equity financing? Dividend payment, right? What will be the cost? Dividend payment. If you collect the fund from equity source, equity financing, then you need to pay dividends to your shareholders, right? To your shareholders. It depends on company's policy. Either you can invest these these return earnings to your company, or you will pay. If you don't pay the dividends to your shareholders, you could reinvest to your asset, to your different projects, to maximize your shareholders' wealth. You understand? Okay. So, whenever we are going to collect bank funds from different sources of financing like deposits, borrowed funds and capital, main thing is that you have to consider these three factors. Okay, the duration to hold this fund into your bank, into your institution. After that, relative advantages. You have to consider relative advantages, like you are getting the fund but you don't know the advantage of this fund. Will you choose this option? No, right? Of course not. We'll discuss it later. Okay, no problem. And then you must consider the cost of funds. Okay? I am collecting fund from you, so I need to pay you interest. If I need to pay you interest, then the interest expense is the cost of that fund that I borrowed from you, right? You understand? Okay, let's discuss about those sources. Okay, what are them? At previous slide we discussed about deposits, borrowed funds and capital. Just remind those things. Deposit, borrowed funds, capital. These are the collector of bank funds. These are the collector of this bank fund. Okay, so now we are going to discuss detail about those things, about these terms. So first of all, capital. What is the capital? What is the capital? Whatever you have in cash, this is your capital. Okay? So let's see the definition. Capital is the first source of bank fund. Capital is the first source of the bank fund. Bank also collects fund through selling of long-term debenture. What is the debenture? Debenture is a bank loan. Is a form of a debenture, form of a loan. For example, I am selling you something, paper. I am selling you the paper. What is called the paper? Debenture. I am selling you debenture and I am collecting the fund, right? In terms of what? In terms of interest. Interest payment. Okay, I will give you interest after that. So debenture is a long-term debt. Debenture is long-term debt. Okay. Generally, bank collects owner's fund through issuing share. So this two way we discussed about these things like debt financing and equity financing. So debenture is a debt financing. Okay. Long term, of course, long term, not short term. Long term debt financing. And generally, bank collects owner's fund of issuing shares. For example, you are the owners. You want to invest in a company. I mean, you want to be a shareholder of a company, right? By what do you call? Purchasing some shares or something like that the company issues, right? So bank collects owner's fund through issuing shares. That means at the same time they are issuing debentures for the long-term plan collecting the funds, borrowing funds, and at the same time they are issuing the shares. Selling the shares. So these are two ways of collecting funds. Equity financing and debt financing together. Okay? It depends on the company's policy. It depends on the size of the company. Understand? Is it mandatory for every company collecting those funds from these two sources? No, right? For example, your company is very little, so you don't need to sell your shares if your company is not well known or well reputed or prestigious or whatever it is. It doesn't have any market value. For example, so and you are not listed in the DSC, Dhaka Stock Exchange. So how could you sell your share publicly? I'm talking about the public trade. Okay. So you cannot go for it. You can't go for it. Okay? So you just only going for bank loan to start a business. You have the capital and you are going for bank loan. So why it says long-term debenture is a capital? For example, you have a startup capital, right? You have a big amount of money in the start of your business. This is also your capital. And when you are selling debentures for a long term, that means you are getting a money for a long term. So in the short term basis, what is that? In the short term basis, this is your capital. You can use by whatever you want, right? However you want, you can use this fund, isn't it? Then it will be considered as a capital also. And what you are getting from shareholders by issuing shares, equity financing, this is also considered as a capital. This is also considered as a capital. So you understand? So these are three types of capitals. What are them? Your own money in hand, cash in hand. What happened? What happened? Can you pause the video? First,